Hello friends, today we are going to learn the northwest corner method to solve a transportation problem. In this method, we have to start the allocations from the northwest corner cell of the cost matrix, that is the 1 1 cell. So before going towards the example, first we will see the steps to solve the transportation problem by this method. Start allocations from the northwest cell, that is the 1 1 cell. Allocate minimum of demand and supply units to this cell. If demand is exhausted, then move towards the next column in the same row. If supply is exhausted, then move towards the next row in the same column. If supply and demand are exhausted at the same time, then move diagonally to the next cell and allocate as maximum units as possible. Calculate the total transportation cost by multiplying the allocated units to the cost in the corresponding cell and then add the values. Let us solve the example by northwest corner method. Here first we will find whether the problem is balanced or unbalanced. Now the total demand is equal to 20 plus 95 plus 35 equal to 150, and the total supply is equal to 50 plus 40 plus 60 equal to again 150. That means the total demand equal to total supply, therefore the problem is balanced. So let us start with first step. The first step is to start with the northwest corner cell, that is to this cell. Now here we can allocate minimum of demand and supply. So the supply is 50 units and the demand is 20 units. So we can allocate minimum of 20 and 50, that is 20 units to this cell. So allocate 20 units here. Demand is exhausted and supply remains 30 units. Now as the demand is exhausted, so we move to the next cell in the same row, that is to this cell. Here the supply is 30 units and the demand is 95 units. So we can allocate minimum of 30 and 95, that is 30 units to this cell. So allocate 30 units here. Supply is exhausted and demand remains 65 units. Now as the supply is exhausted, we move towards the next cell in the same column, that is to this cell. Here the demand is 65 units and the supply is 40 units. So minimum of 40 and 65 equal to 40. So we allocate 40 units here. The supply is exhausted, demand remains 25 units. So as the supply is exhausted, we move towards the next cell in the same column, that is to this cell. Here the demand is 25 units and the supply is 60 units. So minimum of 25 and 60, that is equal to 25 units allocate here. Demand is exhausted and supply remains 35 units. As the demand is exhausted, we move toward the next cell in the same row. So here the demand is 35 units and the supply is also 35 units. So we allocate 35 units here. Demand is exhausted and the supply is also exhausted. Now calculate the total transportation cost by multiplying the allocated units to the cost in the corresponding cell and then adding all the sums. So 20 into 15 plus 30 into 8 plus 40 into 6 plus 25 into 9 plus 35 into 6 equal to 1215. So the total minimum transportation cost is 1215. Let us see another example by northwest corner method. Here the total demand is equal to 19 units and the total supply is 15 units. That means the supply is less than demand by 4 units. So we add a dummy row having 0 transportation cost and supply as 4 units. So here we have added a row having the transportation cost as 0 to each cell and the supply as 4 units. Now the total demand is 19 units and the total supply is also 19 units. That means the problem is balanced now. So we solve it by northwest corner method. So start from the 1 cell, that is this cell. Here the demand is 7 units and the supply is 4 units. So we allocate minimum of 4 and 7, that is 4 units to this cell. Now the supply is exhausted and the demand remains 3 units. As the supply is exhausted, we move towards the next cell in the same column, that is to this cell. Here the demand is 3 units and the supply is 5 units. So we allocate minimum of 3 and 5, that is equal to 3 units to this cell. Now the demand is exhausted and the supply remains 2 units. Now demand is exhausted, so we move towards the next cell in the same row, that is to this cell. Here the demand is 6 units and the supply is 2 units. So we allocate minimum of 2 and 6, that is 2 units to this cell. Now supply is exhausted and the demand remains 4 units. As the supply is exhausted, we move towards the next cell in the same column, that is to this cell. Here the demand is 4 units and the supply is 6 units. So minimum of 4 and 6. Allocate 4 units to this cell. Demand is exhausted and supply remains 2 units. Now demand is exhausted, so move towards the next cell in the same row, that is to this cell. Here the demand is 6 units and the supply is 2 units. So minimum of 2 and 6, that is 2 units. Allocate here. Supply is exhausted. Demand remains 4 units. Now move towards to this cell as the supply is exhausted. So here the demand is 4 units and the supply is also 4 units. So allocate 4 units here. The supply and the demand are exhausted at the same time. So calculate the total transportation cost by multiplying the allocated units to the cost in the corresponding cell. So the total cost is equal to 4 into 0 plus 3 into 2 plus 2 into 3 plus 4 into 2 plus 2 into 0 plus 4 into 0, that is equal to 0 plus 6 plus 6 plus 8 plus 0 plus 0, and this is equal to 20. So the total minimum transportation cost is 20. In the next video, we will learn about the list cost method, that is the matrix minima method.